The USSR was the largest and one of the most diverse countries in the world. In 1922, the Union Treaty formally joined Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Transcaucasus into the Soviet Union, which were divided in 1936 into Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. In 1939, the Red Army went into Eastern Poland to unify Ukrainian and Belarusian lands under the USSR. Stalin then put pressure on Finland to grant a Soviet base, as well as Baltic nations such as Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. All of these nations were eventually proclaimed as Soviet Socialist republics. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union arose as a result of the Russian Revolution and eventually became the dominating governmental party in the Soviet Union. It was rooted in the ideals of Marxism and Leninism, and Stalin believed that socialism can only be achieved through the dictatorship of the proletariat. The Communist Party was made up of almost all the high government officials, and they seek to control every aspect of life in the USSR, such as foreign policy, trade, economy, and social and domestic affairs. Under Stalin, the Bolshevik Party of the USSR predominantly consisted of young workers, soldiers, and peasants in the USSR and eventually became a subgroup of the Communist Party. In 1936 through 1937, there was a naturally growing divergence of opinion amongst leaders, and public purge trials were held to execute or remove old Bolsheviks from the Communist Party. By doing this, Stalin rid himself of all possible rivals for his own position.
The Bolshevik Party Congress was made up of 5,000 members. The basic unit of the Bolshevik Party Congress was the primary party organization. This was a feature in all factories, government offices, schools, collective farms, and any other type of body of any importance. It had meetings about once every 4 years, with its most important job to nominally elect the members of the Central Committee. The Central Committee was made up of 350 members who were elected by the Party Congress. It was originally the highest party authority between Congresses until it established the Political Bureau, also known as the Politburo. Due to the Central Committee's large size, it was extremely difficult for members to make quick decisions, resulting in the almost immediate loss of power to the Politburo, Secretariat, and other party organs. The Central Committee met twice a year as forum for the Politburo.
The Politburo was composed of 11 members, nominally elected by the Central Committee of the Communist Party. Under Stalin, the Politburo made all of the major decisions. It was the highest policy-making government authority under the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, as it oversaw operations of the USSR through the Central Committee, the Secretariat, and the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet.
The Secretariat was the chief administrative body that was made up of 11 members elected by the Central Committee. It was led by the General Secretary of the Bolshevik Party Congress, who was also a Politburo member. The Secretariat was responsible for the day-to-day work administration of the party rather than drafting government policy, as it exchanged its information with regional party information and directed their activities.
The role of the Soviet people was to accept what the state allowed. Under Stalin's rule, the Soviet people lost much of their freedom. The state fully controlled the media. Soviet people found listening or reading anything that did not pertain to the state's law were severely punished. Stalin developed what became known as a cult of personality. Many writers and painters were ordered to glorify Stalin in their works. The legislature of the Soviet Union consisted of the Soviet of the Union, which was composed of 767 members, whose delegates represented small districts, as well as the Soviet of Nationalities, which consisted of 750 members, elected to represent the Union republics.
The head of the political system was the head of the state, who was also the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet. To better understand the level of power the Supreme Soviet had, it can be compared to that of Parliament or Congress. The Supreme Soviet also formed the Council of Ministers. Within this structure, they had all legislative power and elected the Presidium, as well as appointed the Procurator General of the Soviet Union. The Supreme Soviet also had the power of passing constitutional amendments. The Soviet of the Union was a lower chamber of the Supreme Soviet, the upper chamber being the Soviet of Nationalities. The members in the Soviet of the Union were elected based on population, where one deputy became a representative for every 300,000 citizens. The Soviet Union elected a chairman for that chamber and his 4 deputies in permanent committees, such as mandates, budget planning, legislative proposals, transportation and communications, and also foreign affairs. Within the Soviet of the Union, there was 767 members that represented smaller districts. The Presidium of the Supreme Soviets is an official legislative body with the head of the state being the president, elected by the Supreme Soviets. The president was the chairman, who had 15 deputies, a secretary, and an additional 20 members, accountable to the Supreme Soviet of USSR for all activities, and some powers included declaration of war, declaration of martial law in the interest of defending the USSR, ratification and denunciation of international treaties signed by the USSR, and interpretation of Soviet law. The Council of Ministers consisted of 90 members, a collective executive body of ministers representing their ministries. The members were the premier, the chairman, and the republic ministers. The men were governmental leaders with non-production responsibilities, including finance, health, and internal and external affairs. The Council of Ministers was the de jure government, having the highest executive and administrative body of the Soviet Union.